He gave up the one place that still smelled like her to buy his twin daughters a future. 25 years later, they returned, but not alone, and not just with gratitude. They brought something that would change everything. Before we begin this unforgettable journey of love, sacrifice, and second chances, if you believe in the power of kindness and stories that heal the heart, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what happens next. The old cabin creaked with the weight of memory. Even after 25 winters, the wood still carried the scent of pine and pipe tobacco. Of her, Harlan Whitaker stood in the doorway, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand, the other resting on the frame he had carved with his bare hands the year his wife said yes. The initials H+L, etched into the beam above his head, had faded, but not disappeared. Like everything else he loved. A frost had settled on the grass outside. The Montana wind whistled through the trees, with the same mournful tone it had carried the night he built the porch steps, board by board, after she passed. His boots were worn, his flannel jacket patched in places with care, and his beard now more silver than black. He looked like a man weathered by time, and he was. He sipped from the mug and turned his eyes to the two framed photographs on the mantel. Twin girls, no older than 6 in the first picture, covered in flour, their faces frozen mid-laughter beside a half-iced birthday cake. In the second, high school graduation gowns, still side by side, still smiling, Haley and Harper, his daughters, his miracles. And now, they were gone. Off chasing dreams in cities that didn't snow like this. Haley, the fearless one, had always wanted to fly. Harper, more thoughtful, saw beauty in lines and shapes and old buildings that whispered stories. He hadn't seen them in over 3 years. College, careers, life. But he had never once missed sending a letter or a package on their birthdays, even if it meant skipping meals that week. He reached for the envelope on the table. Thick. Official. His calloused fingers trembled as he opened it. Final notice. Outstanding tuition balance. $14,900. Due immediately to avoid deregistration. Harlan lowered the letter slowly. His breath clouded the air. The last payment had cleared his savings. He had sold tools, his truck, even the old wristwatch Lena gave him on their wedding night. And now this. His eyes drifted toward the heart of the cabin, the fireplace. The spot where Lena used to sit on winter nights, reading aloud while the girls fell asleep in her lap. His vision blurred. There was only one thing left he hadn't sold. The one thing he swore he never would. The cabin. Their home. Their history. Their love, framed in timber and time. But what use was history if it stood in the way of a future? He sat down on the edge of the worn leather couch, the same one they'd kissed on during their first snowfall as newlyweds. His body sank with the weight of the years, of the grief, of the choices he had made, and the one he now couldn't avoid. He reached into the drawer beneath the lamp and pulled out a creased manila folder, title deed, Whitaker property. His name, her name, and beneath them, a line for the signature that would unwrite their story. Harlan stared at it for a long time. He thought of Haley in a cockpit, soaring above clouds, and Harper sketching bridges over rivers in cities she hadn't yet seen. They had fire in them. Dreamers, like their mother. He couldn't keep them grounded because he was afraid to let go. Letting go wasn't forgetting. Letting go was love. He set the coffee down, reached for the pen. Signed. 2 weeks later, the cabin was no longer his. The new owner, a quiet man from Idaho, nodded respectfully and said little. Harlan said less. He left behind the rocking chair, the books, the iron skillet seasoned from years of pancakes, and the shelf of hand-carved animals Lena made with the girls. He took only what he needed: a duffel bag, a box of photos, and his wife's worn leather Bible. He moved into the back of an old Ford pickup parked near the edge of Elk Ridge. There, among the trees and silence, he found the closest thing to peace he'd known in years. He worked odd jobs. He split wood. He watched the seasons change. He never told the girls he sold the cabin, not because he was ashamed, but because some sacrifices were meant to stay invisible. The sky was overcast when Harlan stepped inside the cabin for what he knew would be the last time. The light had changed, or maybe it was just him. Shadows stretched longer across the floorboards. The hearth was cold. Even the silence seemed heavier. He ran his hand along the familiar wall, fingertips brushing the knots in the pine, where Lena once measured the girl's height with a pencil. The marks were faint now, but he could still make out the initials beside them. HH and HR. Haley and Harper. Little girls with mismatched socks and wild questions, racing up and down the hallway, while their mother warned them not to slam the door. He turned toward the fireplace, where their first Christmas tree had stood. They hadn't had much that year. Just a few handmade ornaments, a string of popcorn, and Lena's voice humming carols into the night. He remembered the way her head leaned against his shoulder as the fire crackled, her hair smelling like cinnamon and snow. Harlan sat down slowly on the edge of the hearth. He stared into the empty grate and imagined the flames. For a moment, he let himself believe she was still there. Maybe in the walls, the floor, the scent of cedar in the air. But grief was a trickster. It gave you memories that warmed your chest, then left your hands cold. He stood and walked to the small bookshelf Lena had built herself. The wood was slightly warped, the shelves uneven, but it had stood through every winter. He knelt and opened a worn drawer beneath it, pulling out a stack of old letters, some from Lena, others he had written but never sent. He slid one out at random and opened it. "Dear girls, I'm sorry the water heater broke again. I fixed it the best I could, with a little help from duct tape and your mother's spirit. One day, you'll understand that some things don't need to be perfect to work. They just need someone to care enough to fix them. Love, Dad." Harlan smiled faintly and tucked the letter back in. That's what the cabin was. Something imperfect, but full of care. Every crack in the wall, every uneven nail was part of a story. And now, he had to let it go. He moved through the rooms quietly, like walking through someone else's dream. In the girl's old bedroom, the wallpaper was peeling near the corners. He reached for a photograph on the windowsill. 2 blonde heads, noses pressed against the glass, snow falling outside. Harper had lost her front tooth that week. Haley had refused to smile unless she was holding the cat. He didn't pack the photo. He left it exactly where it was. Downstairs, the last box sat on the kitchen counter. A few clothes, some tools, and Lena's worn Bible, its pages curled and underlined with soft blue ink. He added a flask of maple syrup from the pantry and a bundle of kindling wrapped in a faded scarf, the one Lena had knitted during her final winter. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Mr. Dietrich, the buyer, stood with a folded contract in hand. He was polite, almost reverent in his quietness, like he understood he wasn't just buying a structure, but something sacred. Harlan didn't say much, just signed the papers. After the handshake, Mr. Dietrich hesitated. "You sure you don't want to keep the rocking chair? Or the carving on the mantel?" Harlan shook his head slowly. "They belong here, not in the back of a truck." He watched the man drive off, then stepped outside for the last time. The porch steps groaned under his boots. Snowflakes had started to fall, lazy and soft, floating like ashes on a breeze. He looked out across the field, where Lena once planted sunflowers and where the girls used to chase fireflies. Then he turned, climbed into his rusted Ford pickup, and drove away. The first night in the truck was harder than he'd expected. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The air inside was sharp, bitter even, though he had layered 3 sleeping bags and a blanket. He lit a candle and placed it in an old lantern. It wasn't much, but the light flickered gently against the metal walls, casting warm shadows like ghosts. Harlan lay there, staring at the ceiling of the truck, the roof just inches above his face. He imagined the cabin, the tall ceilings, the wooden beams, the scent of stew simmering in a cast-iron pot. He imagined Lena humming again. He reached for her Bible, flipped it open, and found a small paper pressed between Psalms and Proverbs. It was a dried forget-me-not. His eyes filled. He smiled. "I didn't lose her," he whispered. "I just gave her a future she never got to see." That night, for the first time in a long while, Harlan slept. Not well, not deeply, but with peace enough to know he had done what love demanded. He let go. But love, as he would soon learn, has a way of circling back when you least expect it. The wind had a different sound on the ridge, wilder, less tempered by trees or rooftops. It moaned through the brush at night, stirring leaves and memories. But Harlan Whitaker, wrapped in a thick wool blanket inside the back of his old pickup, was beginning to find comfort in the silence. He had been living like this for 6 weeks now. The spot he had chosen was just off a forgotten road that curved through Elk Ridge, far enough from town to keep curious eyes away, but close enough that he could walk to Cal's Feed and Supply when he needed a warm coffee or a can of beans. Each morning began the same. Harlan would strike a match, light the small portable stove beside the tailgate, and wait for the water to boil. The steam rising from the chipped metal pot was one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. No radio, no phone, no indulgences. Just silence, pine, and breath. And the letters. There were dozens of them now, tucked inside a small wooden box beneath his cot. Letters he had written to Haley and Harper almost daily, never mailed, never shown. Just words, scratched in blue ink on yellowed pages, as if trying to prove to himself that he still existed in their lives, even if they had outgrown his world. February 12th. Girls. I fixed an old fence post today with rope and grit. Reminded me of when you two tried to build a treehouse and used Dad's good hammer as a paintbrush. I didn't say anything at the time, but it made me laugh. You were both so sure you knew everything. You still might. I hope you're flying high, building big, doing good. Don't worry about me. I'm still standing. Love always, Dad. He folded it and placed it in the box, sighing. The hardest part wasn't the cold, or the meals he skipped, or the ache in his knees that never quite left since the cabin days. It was the not knowing. Were they okay? Were they happy? Did they think of him? He hadn't heard from them in nearly a year. They sent a few texts during the holidays, a call on Father's Day. But he didn't blame them. They were living their lives, lives he had made possible by giving up the only thing he had left. That's what love did. It let go so others could reach higher. Still, some nights were lonelier than others. One evening, after a long day chopping wood for the McCullough farm, Harlan stopped by the back porch of the church on Cherry Lane. He wasn't religious in the conventional sense, but the old chapel had a donation box and a small bookshelf with worn paperbacks. He returned a borrowed novel and spotted a woman placing a basket of bread on the steps. Claire. She hadn't changed much in 25 years. A little grayer, perhaps. Lines around her eyes from either joy or sorrow. Maybe both. She turned, and their eyes met for the first time in decades. Her breath caught. "Harlan?" she said, squinting in disbelief. "Is that you?" He nodded, unsure of how to greet someone who had once been so close, then so distant. They hadn't spoken since Lena's funeral. She had brought soup and a folded quilt that day, then disappeared, as if honoring some unspoken boundary. "Didn't know you were back," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "Just passing through." Claire smiled softly. "You never really passed through Elk Ridge. It holds on." He didn't know how to answer that, so he nodded and turned to leave. But before he could, she added, "You still like peach preserves?" That stopped him. "Always." She held out a jar from the basket. "Then this one's for you. No strings attached." He took it with quiet gratitude. That night, he opened it beside his lantern. The first taste was sweet, then sharp, and somehow, it hurt. Not because it reminded him of Lena, but because it reminded him that someone still remembered what he loved. Weeks passed. Spring hinted at its return with early thaws and the occasional chirp of birdsong. Harlan started helping around town more. He split wood for widows, fixed screen doors, unclogged gutters. Never for money, always for barter or thanks. It wasn't charity. It was purpose. And slowly, faces softened around him. People stopped pretending they didn't see him. They waved, asked about the weather, left old coats hanging from fences, just in case someone needed them. But still, every evening, back in the truck, he wrote to the girls. He told them about a baby goat born early on a neighbor's farm, about a young couple who danced to music on their front porch under the stars, about how he dreamed of Lena last night, not in sadness, but in laughter. And he never mailed a single one, until the day he found a letter waiting for him, in the bottom of his duffel bag, buried beneath old flannel and thermals. It was Harper's handwriting. "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, it means we found the cabin, or what's left of it. We don't know where you are right now, but we hope this letter finds its way into your hands somehow. We bought it back, Dad. The cabin. We're rebuilding it, just like you did. I'm designing it. Haley's funding it. It'll be ours again. Yours again. If you're willing to come home, we'll be waiting. With love, Harper and Haley." Harlan sat motionless in the dim light of his lantern, letter trembling in his hand. Outside, the wind had gone still. Only the sound of his own breathing filled the space. It was the first time in years he had cried without shame. The cabin was barely standing. Its roof sagged under the weight of time and too many winters. Ivy clawed up the eastern wall like a slow-moving fire, and the once shining windows were now blind with dust. Weeds overtook the path that had once led to a porch light that always flickered on when the girls came home after dark. Harper stood motionless in front of the ruins, blueprint tube tucked under one arm, her other hand shaking as she brushed strands of wind-blown hair from her eyes. The place looked smaller than she remembered, but no less sacred. "It's not as bad as it looks," said the realtor, a young man in too tight shoes who kept glancing at his watch. "It's got bones, just needs a gut renovation. Honestly, if you're thinking about tearing it down, I know a developer who'd pay cash." "No." Harper's voice cut clean and final. He raised his eyebrows but nodded. "Okay then. I'll email you the paperwork." As the man walked off toward his SUV, she took a long breath and stepped toward the front door, or where the door used to be. The frame was open to the wind now. She stepped through it carefully, feeling as though she were walking into a memory. It smelled like old cedar and wet earth. The fireplace was still there, though half cracked and soot-stained. On the mantel, by some miracle, the carving their father had made, H plus L inside a heart, still remained, barely legible beneath moss and time. She reached out and touched it, fingertips trembling. 2 weeks earlier, the idea had seemed like a fantasy. It was Haley's suggestion, thrown out casually during a phone call while she was grounded in Chicago due to weather. "What if we bought it back?" she had said, half laughing, half serious. Harper had paused mid-sketch. "The cabin?" "I looked it up," Haley said. "It went back on the market. It's a wreck, but Maybe it's time. Harper hadn't replied immediately. Her life was filled with lines and deadlines, modern apartments and glass towers. But something inside her had stirred, a quiet tug at the base of her ribs, where the voice of childhood still lived. The idea rooted itself like a seed. By morning, she was calling realtors. By evening, she was drawing. Now, standing in the shell of their childhood, Harper saw not decay, but possibility. She unrolled the blueprint on a makeshift table, pinning down the corners with old stones. The design was faithful to the original, but with thoughtful touches. Larger windows to let in more light, radiant heating in the floors, solar panels hidden behind the gables. She would preserve the fireplace, restore the heart carving, add 2 rocking chairs on the front porch, like the ones their parents used to sit in after the girls went to bed. It wasn't just a renovation. It was a resurrection. That weekend, Haley flew in. She stepped out of the rental car in boots and a leather bomber jacket, still smelling of jet fuel and wind. Harper ran to meet her, and for a moment, they stood in silence, staring at the cabin together. "It's worse than I imagined," Haley said, grinning. "But it feels right." They walked the perimeter together, Haley snapping photos while Harper explained the structural reinforcements she planned. Later, they stood in the middle of what used to be the living room. Haley pointed to a corner where a sunbeam fell through a broken shingle. "That's where the Christmas tree was," Harper nodded. "And the presents under it. Remember the time Dad built that sled out of scrap wood?" "And it fell apart on the first hill?" Haley laughed, a sound full of both joy and ache. They grew quiet again. Harper turned to her sister. "You think he'll come back?" "I think," Haley said, her voice soft, "that he never really left." That night, back at the small motel where they were staying, Haley pulled out a letter. "I left this in his duffel when I visited him last month," she said. "You saw him?" "Just for an hour. He wouldn't let me stay, wouldn't let me help. But he looked tired, Harp. Tired in a way that scared me." Harper opened the envelope and read the letter again. Their own words stared back at her like a promise. "We bought it back, Dad. We're rebuilding it, just like you did. I'm designing it. Haley's funding it. It'll be ours again. Yours again. If you're willing to come home, we'll be waiting." Harper folded the letter and tucked it into her journal. "We'll finish it," she said, meeting her sister's gaze, "whether he comes or not." But deep inside, they both hoped for the same thing, that somewhere out there, their father was reading their words by lantern light, that he would see not a request, but an invitation, not guilt, but grace, that he would come home. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, tucked beneath a tin of canned peaches and a thermos of soup, both left at the foot of Harlan's truck by someone too discreet to be thanked in person. Elk Ridge had a way of caring without intruding. Harlan noticed the edge of paper peeking out from the thermos lid. He hesitated before pulling it free. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Missoula, a rental car reservation, and a handwritten note in neat, blocky print. "Dad, come home. We've rebuilt it. All we're missing is you. Haley and Harper." He sat down heavily on the tailgate, the old metal groaning under him. His breath came slow, like it had to remember how to move through lungs unprepared for the weight of possibility. For a long time, he didn't move. The trees whispered around him. Overhead, a hawk circled in the open sky, free, sure, above it all. Harlan looked down at the letter again, the edges soft from where he gripped it. His first instinct was to fold it neatly and place it in the box with all the others. The unsent words, the unwritten chapters. But this wasn't a letter he could store away. This was a question that demanded an answer. The flight left in 2 days. That night, sleep came in shallow waves. He woke more than once, heart pounding, his mind spinning with what-ifs. What if they regretted seeing him? What if he was just an old man, too late for everything? What if they had rebuilt the cabin so well that it no longer needed the man who first nailed its bones together? But by morning, the answer had already grown roots. He shaved. He packed. He folded his best shirt, the one with the least fray around the cuffs, and tucked in Lena's Bible and the photograph of the girls from their high school graduation. The box of letters stayed behind. They were no longer needed. The airport was bright and sterile, all chrome and announcements and families in a hurry. Harlan shuffled through security with a quiet patience that seemed foreign to the place. His boots were too heavy for the scanner, and his belt set off the metal detector. Still, he moved through it all without complaint. At the gate, he sat quietly, watching the snow fall beyond the windows. Montana sky, heavy clouds, the kind of snow that blanketed years and made things new again. When they called boarding, he moved slowly, as if stepping onto a threshold he had long forgotten how to cross. It wasn't until he was halfway down the jet bridge that he heard her voice. "Sir?" came a familiar tone over his shoulder. He turned. Haley stood at the entrance of the plane in uniform, crisp navy slacks, white blouse, and a pilot's jacket bearing her name. Captain H. Whitaker. She was taller than he remembered, more composed, but her smile was the same, the one that used to light up the cabin on snow days when school was canceled. "Is this your flight?" he asked, his voice unsteady. She stepped forward. "It is, and I've waited a long time to bring you home." They didn't embrace, not yet, but their eyes held each other like arms used to, like lullabies used to, like forgiveness waiting quietly in the corner of every unspoken word. "I don't like flying," he admitted. "You built a cabin that stood through 30 winters. You'll be fine." She guided him to the first row, gave him a wink, and disappeared into the cockpit. The flight was smoother than he expected. Clear skies, a soft hum, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but full of something just out of reach. He watched the clouds pass below, his hands folded over his chest. He thought about the cabin, not the new one, the old one. The creaks, the warmth, the way Lena used to hum while folding towels, the smell of cinnamon bread cooling on the sill. He let the memories come this time. Not as ghosts, but as gifts. The car ride from Missoula to the foothills was like driving through memory. The roads were winding, the trees taller than he remembered, or maybe he had just grown smaller. As he turned the final bend, near what once had been their land, his heart paused. The cabin was there, no longer tired, no longer broken. It stood proud, sturdy, radiant beneath a sunset that painted it gold. The porch had 2 rocking chairs. A lantern flickered by the door, and on the front steps, Harper waited, holding a thermos in one hand and a blueprint roll in the other. She saw him, and she smiled. It was the smile of a little girl who once built forts in the living room with couch cushions and blankets, a smile of forgiveness, of welcome. He parked slowly, turning off the engine with hands that couldn't stop trembling. She approached, hugged him gently, firmly, and whispered, "You're home." He didn't trust himself to speak. Together, they walked toward the cabin. The moment he stepped inside, the scent hit him. Pine wood, cinnamon, and fresh paint. It was like stepping into the past, only warmer, cleaner, better. The heart on the mantel, H+L, had been lovingly traced over, preserved with care. Tears burned his eyes, but he didn't hide them. "Do you like it?" Harper asked quietly. He turned, voice shaking. "It's too much." "No, Dad," she said. "It's just enough." That night, they sat around a fire that crackled with welcome. Haley joined them later, still in uniform, and poured him coffee just like Lena used to. No one rushed the moment. No one tried to fix it with words. They simply existed. Together, Harlan stood alone in the center of the cabin, surrounded by light and memory. The air inside was warmer than he remembered, not just from the radiant heat Harper had installed beneath the floorboards, but from something deeper. The love built into every detail. The floors had been refinished, but preserved, their knots and scuffs still whispering stories from years past. The beams overhead had been sanded smooth, yet they held firm the spirit of the hands that once raised them, his and Lena's. He walked slowly, reverently, as though retracing the footsteps of a life he thought he'd left behind. Harper watched from the kitchen doorway, arms folded gently across her chest, trying not to interrupt what was clearly a private pilgrimage. Haley had driven into town for supplies, but Harper had insisted on staying behind. She knew her father needed this first moment with the cabin to be his alone. As Harlan moved through the space, he paused at the fireplace. The stone had been cleaned, the hearth rebuilt, but the heart carved above it, H+L, remained untouched, preserved, respected. He ran his fingers along the initials. Time had softened their edges, but not their meaning. "Still here," he murmured. "It was the first thing I told the builders," Harper said softly. "Don't touch that carving, no matter what." He turned, eyes wet but steady. "You remembered?" Harper stepped forward. "I never forgot." They stood in silence for a moment, the fire crackling gently beside them. Then Harper reached into her back pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper. "It's the original floor plan," she said. "I found it in your old tool chest, the one with the red handle." "You drew it by hand." He blinked, startled. "I thought I'd lost that years ago." "I made some updates," she continued. "Modern insulation, better windows, solar panels on the roof. Don't worry, they're hidden behind the gables. But the bones, they're all yours." He took the paper with care, eyes scanning the lines. There was his sketching, his clumsy cursive, his measurements made with an old tape, and a younger man's dreams. Next to each of his notations were Harper's in crisp, clean print. Their handwriting, father and daughter, 25 years apart, now shared the same page. "I didn't just want to rebuild it," she said. "I wanted to honor it." He folded the plan, placed it on the mantel, and turned to her. "You did." Later that afternoon, they sat on the new porch swing as the wind rustled through the trees. The cabin was nestled against the same backdrop it had always known: towering pines, a distant ridgeline, and sky that seemed wider than anywhere else on Earth. But everything felt different now. Not because the land had changed, but because he had. "Can I ask you something?" Harper said, her voice cautious. "Anything. Why didn't you tell us you sold it?" He looked down at his hands, calloused still, even after years away from carpentry. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me," he said after a long pause. "It wasn't a sacrifice if I expected something in return." Harper's eyes filled. "But we would have, Dad, we wanted to help." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. But back then, you had stars in your eyes. Both of you. I didn't want to be the weight that kept you from flying." She reached over, placed a hand over his. "You were never the weight. You were the wind beneath us." He smiled deeply, the kind that starts in the heart and works its way up. That evening, Haley returned with groceries and 2 bottles of Lena's favorite wine. They made dinner together. Nothing fancy, just roasted chicken, vegetables, and cornbread from a mix. But the scent that filled the cabin was home. For the first time in decades, the kitchen echoed with conversation, clinking plates, and the sound of laughter. Afterward, Harlan found himself alone for a moment, standing in the hallway near the girls' old bedroom. The door had been repainted, the knob replaced, but when he opened it, The layout was identical. 2 twin beds, a small desk, a bookshelf with familiar titles, Charlotte's Web, Where the Red Fern Grows, a few Nancy Drews. They had recreated it, piece by piece, as if nothing had ever changed, but everything had. He closed the door gently and returned to the living room, where a fire danced in the hearth, and his daughters were curled up on the couch, mugs of tea in hand. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside them. And for the first time in years, he let the peace in. Later that night, when the fire had dimmed and the cabin was still, Harper laid a folded blanket at the foot of the guest bed, the one they'd made for him. "I'll take the couch," Harlan said automatically. "No, Dad," she said, a playful firmness in her tone. "You built this place. You sleep in it properly," he chuckled. "Fair enough." As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "There's something else we wanted to show you. Tomorrow. It's outside, near the old garden." "What is it?" Harper smiled. "You'll see. It's a surprise." He nodded, too tired to argue, and sank into the mattress. It was soft, but not too soft, familiar in a way that brought his mind to stillness. Outside, the wind had died down. Inside, Harlan closed his eyes, and for the first time in a quarter-century, he slept in his own bed. Not the bed of the past, but one rebuilt, with love, memory, and the hands of those who never forgot him. The morning sun rose soft and golden, stretching long shadows across the porch, as dew glistened like glass on the wild grass. Harlan woke early, not from habit, but from something different. Curiosity. Harper had promised a surprise. After a quiet breakfast of toast and jam, she handed him a wool-lined jacket and a scarf Lena had once knit. He hadn't worn it in years, but somehow it still smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. "Come on," Harper said, smiling. "It's just a short walk." They followed a narrow path that curved behind the cabin, winding past the old vegetable patch that now lay dormant beneath straw and winter mulch. 100 yards beyond, nestled between 2 birch trees, stood a small wooden gate. Ivy curled around its edges, and a hand-painted sign hung overhead. "The Whitaker Garden." In memory of Lena, Harlan froze. His breath caught in his throat as he pushed the gate open. What lay before him was more than a garden. It was a tribute to a life once lived and never forgotten. Stone pathways snaked through raised flower beds marked with names. Lena's lavender, Haley's hydrangeas, Harper's hollyhocks. There was even a carved bench beneath a dogwood tree and a copper plaque that read, "She planted love in everything she touched." Harlan blinked against the sting in his eyes. "You did this?" Harper nodded. "We started it a few years ago. Haley flies in new bulbs every season. I designed the layout based on Mom's old sketches. We found them in her sewing box." He sat on the bench, hands resting in his lap. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Harper whispered. "Just feel it." He did. The breeze moved gently through the branches, birds chirped somewhere beyond the fence, and the scent of rosemary and mint filled the air. For a man who had spent the last 2 decades surviving on silence, this was the first time it felt like he could breathe again. They returned to the cabin before lunch, where a truck was already parked in the driveway. Haley stepped out from the side porch with a grin. "Dad, we have another visitor." Out of the driver's side came Claire. Harlan paused. Her hair was streaked with silver now, tied back in a loose braid. She wore a soft brown coat with leather elbow patches and carried a small basket of what looked like fresh preserves. Her smile was gentle, uncertain, but warm. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said. Haley kissed her on the cheek. "You're always welcome here." Claire turned to Harlan. "Hello, Harlan. It's been a long time." He stepped forward slowly, unsure of what words to summon for someone who had once appeared in his darkest days with quiet kindness, then disappeared with the same grace. "I thought you moved away," he said. "I did," she replied, "but I came back. Places like Elk Ridge have a way of calling you home when your heart's ready to listen." He gave a faint smile. "I'm still learning how to listen." Claire reached into the basket and held out a jar. "Peach preserves, your favorite. And yes, I added a little cinnamon, just like Lena used to." He took it gently, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. "Thank you," he said, "for remembering." "I never stopped," she said softly. That afternoon, they sat together under the eaves while the girls made lunch inside. The rhythm of conversation was slow at first, like a song being hummed before the words return. But in time, the silence between them became companionable. "You look well," Claire said. Harlan chuckled. "I look like an old man who's been living in the back of a pickup truck. And yet, here you are, back in the home you built, surrounded by people who love you. Not bad for an old man." He looked at her. "Why did you come today?" Claire hesitated, then spoke with the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this in her heart. "Because I spent years wondering what might have happened if I had stayed, if I had come to the cabin again after the funeral. But I thought you needed time, and maybe I needed it too." He nodded. "Time does strange things. It can build fences, but sometimes it tears them down." Claire looked away for a moment, then back. "Do you think there's still space in your life for someone like me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, folded letter, the first he'd taken from the wooden box of unsent words. He handed it to her. She read it silently. "Claire, you probably don't know how much it meant to me. That soup, that quilt, that quiet kindness you offered when I couldn't speak. I didn't know how to ask you to stay. I still don't. But if ever you find yourself on my porch again, I hope I'll be brave enough to ask." Harlan, tears filled her eyes. "You were brave enough," she said. That evening, the four of them shared dinner by candlelight. Laughter came easier now. So did stories. And when Harlan reached for the preserves to spread across his biscuit, he caught Claire's eye and smiled. She smiled back. No promises were made. None were needed. Because sometimes the heart doesn't need vows. Just company. Just return. Snowflakes began to fall that morning, not with the harshness of a storm, but gently, like blessings from a sky that had finally forgiven. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. Harper moved through the main room, clipboard in hand, stopping occasionally to check placement and lighting. She adjusted the angle of a framed photograph, a black and white shot of Harlan and Lena on the porch, their eyes laughing more than their mouths ever could. Behind her, Harlan stood with his hands in his pockets, watching his daughter work with quiet awe. "You've turned this place into something," he began, then paused, struggling for a word that didn't diminish what he felt. Harper looked up. "A home?" He nodded. "Yes, but not just for us." She smiled. "Exactly." By noon, people started arriving. Neighbors, friends from town, and a few gray-haired men with quiet eyes who had once worked beside Harlan in the mills or on roofs back when their backs were straighter and their hands steadier. They came slowly, respectfully, like pilgrims entering a sacred place. Each room of the cabin had been prepared with intention. The guest bedroom now bore a plaque, reserved for fathers in transition. A warm bed for those who gave all they had and have nowhere else to go. The workshop in the back, once filled with rusted tools and forgotten nails, had been transformed into a community woodworking space where retired craftsmen could teach younger ones a trade. Hanging above the door was a sign in bold lettering: The Whitaker Shop, where things are rebuilt. And on the porch, next to the 2 rocking chairs, a small bronze bell had been installed. Haley rang it once, its sound clear and bright through the winter air. "Dad," she said, turning to him, "you should say something." Harlan raised his hand slightly, as if to say he had nothing grand prepared. But the crowd quieted, expectant. He stepped forward. "I don't have a speech," he began. "I don't even know how to talk in front of more than 3 people without stammering, but I do know this." He took a long breath. This cabin was built for love. Lost it. Then found it again. And not just the romantic kind. The kind that survives loss, that keeps writing letters even when no one's reading. The kind that raises kids, lets go of a house, and comes back years later to find the light still on. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. "Thank you for giving it new life," he said, "for letting this place be more than wood and windows. Thank you for letting it be hope." Applause rose, not loud, but strong. A few people wiped their eyes. Claire touched his arm, her hand warm even through his coat. As dusk approached, the last guests departed, leaving the family alone again in the golden quiet of evening. The light from the windows spilled onto the snow in soft shapes. Inside, Haley and Harper began to clean up, stacking plates and folding chairs. Harlan stood by the front window, watching the moon rise behind the trees. Claire approached with 2 mugs of cider. "You never told me," she said gently, handing him one. "Told you what?" "That you dreamed of something like this, that you wanted this place to be more than just memory." He looked down at the mug. "I didn't know I did." "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I realize I never stopped wanting it. I just stopped believing it was possible." She stepped closer. "Some things are too good not to return to." He turned to her, and this time he didn't hesitate. He reached for her hand. They stood there, 2 people weathered by time, surrounded by the hum of love rekindled, not sudden or fiery, but steady and sure. The kind of love that doesn't ask for promises, only presence. Later, as the fire dwindled and the girls retreated upstairs, Harlan wandered into the old living room, now reborn with purpose. On the wall hung a new addition, a large canvas painted by Harper, capturing the cabin at dusk, bathed in gold light with silhouettes in the windows. Beside it, framed in oak, was one of the letters he had never sent. Haley had found it in his truck. He stepped closer and read it again, this time aloud. "Dear girls, if I could give you one thing, it wouldn't be money or land or even a roof. It would be the feeling I had the day I watched you laugh in the snow, knowing that for a moment I had done something right, that I had loved you enough to let go. If you ever come home, I hope you'll see it. Not as a house I left behind, but as the heart I never stopped building." His voice broke slightly at the end. He didn't try to hide it. Harper stepped behind him quietly. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Dad." He turned, and she wrapped her arms around him. Haley joined, and they stood in a quiet tangle of arms, tears, and release. A trinity of love long delayed, now returned in full. That night, before bed, Harlan stepped out onto the porch alone. Snowflakes drifted in slow circles. The bell beside the rocking chair caught the wind and rang once, light and clear. He sat, wrapped in Lena's scarf, and looked at the cabin. It no longer felt like a place he had lost. It felt like a place that had waited for him to return. And he had. The days passed softly. Winter lost its bite in the low sunshine, and patches of earth began to reappear beneath melting snow. The cabin stood firm through it all, warm, lived in, glowing with the rhythm of 3 hearts rebuilding something they hadn't known they still needed. Harlan had fallen into a gentle routine: morning coffee on the porch, quiet work in the communal workshop, evenings beside the fire with his daughters, and Claire. It was not the life he had imagined at 70, but in some ways, it was more than he dared to hope for. And then, one Saturday morning, Claire asked him to walk with her, just the 2 of them. They followed the ridge trail that curved along the back of the cabin property. Harlan hadn't walked it in years, not since the girls were little, back when Lena would pack a tin of biscuits and thermos of apple cider, and they'd climb to the top to watch the sun melt into the trees. Claire was quiet at first, letting the silence speak for them both. Harlan appreciated that. He had grown wary of words over the years. Too many had been wasted. Too few ever truly said. When they reached the clearing at the top, Claire sat on a flat stone and patted the spot beside her. He sat. The valley stretched below them, stitched with pine and shadow. A hawk glided in slow circles above. For a while, they just watched. Then Claire spoke. "You ever wonder if love can start over?" Harlan glanced sideways at her. Not start over, but maybe start again. Different. She nodded. Different is good. They sat in silence again, but this time it felt fuller, like something important was being built between them, not with hammer and nail, but with presence and understanding. "I used to wonder," Claire said, her voice low, "if I missed my moment, if I should have stayed in touch, written, asked." "You didn't owe me anything," Harlan replied. "I know, but maybe I owed it to myself." He turned to her then. "You were there when I needed kindness, that quilt, that soup, that silence you gave when everyone else offered clichés. That mattered more than you know." Claire smiled softly. "You kept the quilt? I still sleep under it." Something shifted in her expression, something warm, vulnerable. "Harlan, I'm not trying to complicate your life. I just—" She paused. "Don't want to leave anything unsaid this time." "You're not complicating anything," he said. "You're clarifying it." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. The touch was light, tentative, but it settled something unspoken between them. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Some beginnings are quieter than that. That evening, as the sky turned rose gold and the wind whispered through the birch trees, Claire stayed for dinner. Haley grilled salmon on the patio, and Harper opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a worthy evening. They ate by candlelight on the new back deck, bundled in sweaters, the glow of string lights weaving warmth through the air. Laughter came easily. Stories flowed. No one rushed the night. After dessert, apple pie from the town bakery, Haley leaned forward and asked, "Dad, when did you know you loved Mom?" Harlan blinked, surprised by the question. Then he chuckled. "When she handed me a sandwich I didn't ask for," he said. "We were building the first frame of the cabin, and I hadn't eaten all day. She showed up, handed me a sandwich and an iced tea and said, 'Even stubborn men need to eat.'" The table laughed. Claire tilted her head. "That's how you knew?" He nodded. "She saw what I didn't say. That's always been love to me, someone who listens without needing the words." The girls fell quiet, thoughtful. And then Harper asked, "Do you think you could love again?" The question hung in the air like mist. Claire looked down at her hands. Harlan didn't. "I think I already am," he said gently. He wasn't looking at the stars. He was looking at her. Claire reached over and touched his knee, a simple, brave gesture. The girls smiled. Later, when the fire had burned low and the cabin grew quiet, Harlan walked Claire to her truck. The air was crisp, but not biting. He opened her door, the way men used to, and she smiled at the gesture. "I haven't had a night like that in a long time," she said. "Me neither." She hesitated, one hand on the door. "Can I ask what happens next?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." She nodded. "Me too." She didn't leave right away. They stood there a moment longer, the porch light casting soft halos around them. Then she reached up and kissed his cheek. It was soft, intentional, and full of promise. When Harlan stepped back inside, the cabin felt different, not in its structure, but in its soul. Something had come alive again, and this time, he wasn't just the man who had returned. He was a man becoming whole. It had been a long time since the cabin had hosted a celebration, but that morning, it buzzed with quiet joy and the scent of rising bread. Haley was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, apron dusted in flour, humming a melody their mother used to sing. Harper moved from room to room with a checklist, double-checking table placements, candles, and printed name cards, each one handwritten in her meticulous architect's script. Outside, fresh snow blanketed the ground like a clean canvas. Pine branches swayed gently above the deck, where strings of soft white lights were being untangled by Claire and Harlan. They worked side by side, speaking little, but moving in rhythm, the kind of silent choreography that comes only from trust and time. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Claire asked, handing him the last strand of lights. He paused, his gloved fingers catching on a knot. "I think I stopped hoping for it. But some things happen when you're finally ready to receive them." She smiled. "Then I'm glad you didn't give up." By noon, a handful of neighbors had arrived, gathering inside with warm cider and wide smiles. Word had spread that today wasn't just another community event. It was a turning point. The formal dedication of the Whitaker Center for Fathers in Transition, the name embossed in bronze just beside the front steps. But for those closest to Harlan, today was something more intimate. It was a day to witness something once broken, now whole again. At 2:00, the front porch bell rang 3 times. Haley stepped outside in her pilot's jacket, the brass buttons glinting in the light. Harper followed in a wool coat and red scarf, her sketches now real walls, her childhood dreams now brick and beam. Between them stood Harlan. He wore the same flannel jacket he'd once thought too worn to keep. Claire had mended it with invisible stitches along the sleeves. He carried no speech, no notes, just a heart full of things he never thought he'd live long enough to say. "I used to think this place had a soul," he began, voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Back when Lena and I built it, board by board, dream by dream. And when I lost her, I thought that soul was gone. Thought the cabin became just wood and nails." He looked at the crowd, then at his daughters. "But I was wrong. This place never stopped breathing. It just waited. It waited for healing, for return, for new beginnings." A hush fell across the porch. "This cabin taught me that love doesn't vanish. It changes shape. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Other times, it looks like 2 daughters rebuilding what their father thought was lost. Or a woman offering peach preserves and patience. Or a stranger ringing the bell, asking if there's a place to stay." He turned slightly, nodding toward the community space behind the main cabin. "I used to build houses. Today, I get to build something better. Hope." Applause rose, not the clapping kind, but the heartful, knowing kind that comes from people who have lived enough to understand that second chances are rare and sacred. Later, as the sun began to dip behind the ridge, casting golden streaks through the birch trees, Haley pulled something from her bag, a folded sheet of paper. "I wasn't sure I should do this," she said, glancing at her sister. "But Harper said if I didn't, she'd take over and probably cry through the whole thing." Harper laughed, already tearing up. Haley unfolded the paper and held it up. It was a map, an aerial rendering of the cabin, its outbuildings, and a trail leading through the woods. In the corner, a note in looping handwriting. Project Expansion Proposal. Phase 2. The Whitaker Legacy, a place to land. She handed it to her father. We want to open a second site, one closer to the city. For young fathers this time, one's just starting out, maybe with nothing but a car and a baby seat. We'll call it the landing strip. Harlan laughed through a lump in his throat. You two think of everything. We learned from the best, Harper said, reaching for his hand. That evening, after everyone had gone, the family sat on the back deck under a navy sky dusted with stars. The fire pit crackled between them. Claire sipped cocoa. Haley leaned her head on Harlan's shoulder. Harper sat curled up in a blanket beside her. Above them, a distant hum filled the air. They looked up as a single plane, a private Cessna, swept low above the ridge. Its wings tilted slightly as it passed over the cabin, and then, trailing behind it, a ribbon of white smoke in the shape of a heart. Harper gasped. Did you? Haley grinned. Had a friend help out? It's not every day your dad becomes a living legend. Harlan chuckled, tears slipping down his cheeks. Well, I'll be. The heart hovered in the sky, fading slowly, like a blessing written in vapor. As the fire burned low and the night folded itself around them, Harlan looked at his daughters. Women now, brilliant, capable, kind. And then at Claire, who had given him space to rediscover himself without demand or urgency. I never thought I'd see all of this, he said softly. Claire took his hand. That's the thing about hope. It tends to show up when we stop expecting it. He nodded. And love? She leaned against him. It was always here. You just needed time to come home. The morning of Harlan Whitaker's 75th birthday arrived with birdsong and sunlight streaming through lace-curtained windows. The cabin smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, just the way Lena used to start their favorite days. Outside, a banner fluttered on the porch, hand-painted in cheerful brushstrokes. Happy 75th, Dad. You are the heart of this home. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of a soft blue shirt Claire had ironed the night before. His hair was thinner, silver now, and his shoulders bore the weight of years, but not the burden. Not anymore. When he stepped into the living room, a wave of warmth greeted him, not just from the fire, but from the people gathered there. Harper and Haley were arranging photographs on a table, snapshots of his life. Young Harlan with a hammer in hand, Lena holding twin newborns, snowball fights, laughter. Claire stood near the window, arranging a vase of wildflowers beside a plate of peach scones. As Harlan approached, he noticed something new on the table. A book, bound in leather, with the words, "Letters to my daughters," embossed in gold on the cover. He opened it gently. Inside were dozens of his handwritten letters, the ones he'd never mailed, all copied carefully in Harper's script, dated and organized. Each one preserved, each word cherished. I wanted you to know we heard you, Harper said, her voice unsteady, even when you thought no one was listening. He touched the page and closed his eyes for a moment. They kept me alive, he whispered. The rest of the day unfolded like a soft song, family arriving from far and wide, old friends from the town bringing homemade pies, neighbors gathering with laughter and hugs. Under the trees behind the cabin, Haley had arranged an outdoor tent with long wooden tables, garlands of pine and rosemary, and twinkling string lights. It looked like something out of a memory, only better, because it was real and now and earned. Before lunch, Harper stood to make an announcement. This isn't just about a birthday, she said, holding up a letter-sized envelope. "It's about legacy." She handed the envelope to her father. Inside was a certificate and a letter from the county. "We had the land rezoned," she explained. "The cabin, the workshop, the garden. It's all officially a nonprofit foundation now. The Whitaker Legacy Center. Your name will be on every application, every grant, every new roof we put over someone's head." Harlan looked up, stunned. "You're making it official?" Claire smiled. It already was. Now the world just knows it too. After cake and music and a round of "Happy Birthday," sung off-key but full of joy, the guests began to leave. One by one, they hugged Harlan. Men with creased hands, women with kind eyes, children who had learned to hammer a nail because of his workshops. Every goodbye was really a thank you. By sunset, the cabin was quiet again. Only family remained. Haley, Harper, Claire, and Harlan sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping cider. The sky blushed with pink and orange, and the first stars winked into view. Harper leaned her head on Harlan's shoulder. "Do you know the moment that always stayed with me?" she asked. He shook his head. "That night you gave up the cabin. I didn't know it then, but I know now. You didn't lose it. You gave it back to us, in a different way." Haley nodded. "And look what we gave back to you." Claire reached for Harlan's hand. "I was afraid I'd lost everything," he said softly. "But you reminded me, love doesn't disappear, it just waits." That night, as they all went inside, Harper lingered on the porch a moment longer. She looked out toward the road, now edged with lanterns, and noticed a figure at the gate, a young man, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding the hand of a little girl with pigtails. She stepped down and greeted them. "Hi," the man said, voice uncertain. "I heard this place helps fathers who, well, don't have anywhere else to go." Harper smiled. "You heard right." She turned and rang the porch bell once. The warm sound echoed into the night. Inside, Harlan turned from the fire and smiled. Later, as he lay in bed with Claire beside him, the old quilt across their legs and Lena's Bible on the nightstand, Harlan whispered, "You think she'd be proud?" Claire squeezed his hand. "I think she'd be right here with you." He closed his eyes, a peace deeper than sleep settling into his bones. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines. The bell beside the rocking chair swayed once, twice, then fell still. And the cabin, once a shelter for grief, now stood as a beacon, a place reborn by love, carved by memory, and built to last. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this story from? Whether you're wrapped in a blanket with a cup of tea or listening on your porch as the sun sets, take a moment to share in the comments. It means more than you know to feel the warmth of this growing community from every corner of the world. And if this story touches your heart, even just a little, consider subscribing. Here, we believe in the power of simple stories to remind us that love, kindness, and second chances still matter. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending your time here. Your presence truly makes this space feel like home.